Hello again everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now today we are journeying to northern England and to an extraordinary Roman site. A site that predates Hadrian's Wall. A place that was important for the Roman frontier along the Stanegate. A place where in the 1970s an extraordinary discovery was made. I am of course talking about Vindolanda. Evidence of pre-Roman activity in the area that would one day become Vindolanda is available to us, with the hill fort nearby at Barkham Hill and also two farmsteads being found, along with a stone circle, which now consists of two stones called Mare and Foal, but it does show that there was a ritualistic use of the area before the Romans arrived. The name Vindolanda is of course the Roman name for the site, but it likely comes from the Brittonic, meaning white lawn. Now the fort itself was manned by auxiliaries of the Roman army, with the first timber and turf fort being built by the first cohort of Tungrians around 85 AD. Now the Tungrians came from Gallia Belgica, and they also rebuilt the fort around 92 AD. But it has to be said that Vindolanda was rebuilt several times during the Roman occupation. In fact, the final stone fort is remarkably 6 feet above the original timber and turf one. In the 90s AD, the Tungrians were replaced by the 9th cohort of Batavians, who came from the Rhine Delta. Now they rebuilt the fort once again, but this version of the fort was short-lived, as in 104 AD, Emperor Trajan commanded that the Batavians join him in his campaigns in Dacia. Now the decision was made to destroy the fort and burn any rubbish. Now it's this decision to destroy the fort and burn the rubbish that means that some of the most extraordinary finds at Vindolanda have survived. But we'll get back to that later. In 105 AD, however, the Tungrians returned to Vindolanda, once again building it in timber and turf. Now what's very interesting at this point is we find a tombstone of a centurion called Titus Annius, who is supposed to have been killed in a war, showing that the Tungrians were engaged in brutal fighting in northern Britain, which set the stage for Hadrian's Wall. The Tungrians continued to occupy Vindolanda in the early 2nd century, and yet again they rebuilt the fort, its 5th incarnation of timber and turf. But later on, when the decision was made to build forts directly into Hadrian's Wall, the Tungrians were relocated from Vindolanda to housesteads. On a side note, many people seem to think that Vindolanda is part of Hadrian's Wall, but it is in fact 2 miles south of it. In 162 AD, following the abandonment of the Antonine Wall, the 2nd cohort of Nevians, members of another Belgic tribe, moved into Vindolanda, and they finally converted the timber and turf structure into a stone fort. Now in the early 3rd century, a Severan complex was built on the site, but this was demolished in the 210s and was eventually replaced by the 2nd stone fort. Now interestingly, most of what you can see there today, including parts of the vicus, date from the 3rd century. Vindolanda continued to be home to a wide range of troops during the 3rd century, with the likes, for example, of the 4th Cavalry Cohort of Gauls, who are commemorated in a dedication to Caracalla in 213 AD. However, Vindolanda isn't all about soldiers and fortifications. The vicus that grew alongside the fort is equally fascinating, with houses, shops, a bathhouse and potentially even a manzio, showing that everyday life thrived at Vindolanda. Towards the end of the 3rd century, the fort was abandoned for a short time, perhaps due to policy changes under Emperor Diocletian. However, it was reoccupied and rebuilt in the 4th century, perhaps in response to the Great Conspiracy of 367 AD. And don't you worry, I will be covering the Great Conspiracy in a future video. The vicus was eventually abandoned during the 4th century AD, but the fort seems to have still been in use well into the post-Roman period. A Christian dedication dated to 600 AD has been found on the site, as well as a tombstone for a man called Brigomaglos, who is interesting in that his name suggests that he might have been Welsh in origin. Now we move on to the most interesting part of Vindolanda, the Vindolanda Tablets. Now these thin, postcard-sized pieces of board that have been preserved in waterlogged conditions give us a rare insight into Roman Britain. They include letters, military rotas, military reports and personal notes. And the only reason we have most of them is that when the Batavians were destroying everything in sight in 104 AD, the British weather seems to have decided these are worth keeping. Now, there are so many of these tablets that it would be near impossible for me to talk about each and every one of them in such a small video. But what I will do is talk about ones that have caught my eye over the years, so you get a sense of what they actually are. And we'll start with one that I find particularly interesting, which is a birthday invitation. Claudia Severita Herlepidina greetings. On 11 September, sister, for the day of the celebration of my birthday, I give you a warm invitation to make sure that you come to us, to make the day more enjoyable for me by your arrival, if you are present. Give my greetings to your Kerry Alice. My alias and my little son send him their greetings. I shall expect you, sister. Farewell, sister, my dearest soul, as I hope to prosper and hail. Now, what makes this one particularly interesting to me, besides the fact that it helps to paint a picture of social norms 2,000 years ago, is the fact that it is the earliest example that we know of a Roman woman writing in Latin in Britain. Let's take a look at another one, shall we? The Britons are unprotected by armour. There are very many cavalry. The cavalry do not use swords, nor do the wretched Britons mount in order to throw javelins. Now, the reason this one particularly interests me is that in the original Latin it uses the word Britunculi, meaning Little Britons, which is a derogatory term, giving us an insight into the relationship between the Romans and the native Britons. And for my last one, I've gone for a classic. I've sent you pairs of socks from Satua, 2 pairs of sandals, and 2 pairs of underpants. The reason that the Vindolanda Tablets are so important is that they help to transform the Roman Empire into a living, breathing community that we can explore. To highlight just how important they are to modern archaeology, I've travelled to all sorts of places in what was the Roman Empire, and you'd be surprised at just how often Vindolanda's name crops up. To pick one example, I was at an exhibition in the Colosseum in 2015, and I can't for the life of me remember what the exhibition was at the time, but I do remember that Vindolanda cropped up a good few times, which shows how important it is. But thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe. It helps immensely, and I'll see you on the next one. Ciao for now.